Asmongold reacts to the news that Barry Weiss blocked the CBS story on the Trump admin sending undocumented immigrants who are prisoner in El Salvador to be tortured. Asmongold says it's great that these immigrants are being tortured and critical news organizations should be banned.
More attention onto the Trump administration's effort to deport these migrants to this very hostile prison where some men say they've been tortured.
Yeah.
Shouldn't have been here illegally. Yep. Nobody asked you to come here. Shouldn't have been here. Maybe then they'll watch this and they'll be like, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't show up then. Could this be a marketing ploy? Well, I think it should be. This is, doesn't mean they deserve to be tortured, though. I want to see what the conditions are. Well, here's the question. If they were being tortured, would I agree to not send them there? No, I don't care. Don't give a shit. Shouldn't have come here.
Sick, dude. If you think people who have made their way into the United States of America and are going through the proper protocols to get gainful employment, who are productive members of American society, if you think that they should be tortured in a slave labor prison without any due process whatsoever in their deportation, specifically for political goals, then, I mean, that's kind of evil. Like, that is pretty evil, right? It's just, I don't know why you have such a hard time with this word. Like, do you want me to say that that's good? I don't think it's good. Do you want me to lie? I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to lie to anybody. No, I don't want torture and I would advocate against it, but I also don't want illegal immigration. Neither of us want torture. There's a place to start the conversation. Okay, you and I might not, but Asmongold is saying this.
This doesn't mean they deserve to be tortured, though. I want to see what the conditions are. Well, here's the question. If they were being tortured, would I agree to not send them there? No, I don't care. Don't give a shit. Shouldn't have come here. And also, maybe that's a good thing now that they know, so they know what's on the table if you break the law.
He talks a big talk. Let him beat someone into tears himself. He can't do it. Of course not. But that doesn't matter, does it? Because a lot of people that jump into this kind of thinking, they do so because of their own personal insecurities. They do so because they're lacking something in their own lives. They do that because they feel more powerful when they think that a much more powerful entity like the American government is doing harm to others that they've declared are their enemy. I think Asman is too practical sometimes. I understand his point of view, but I feel too much guilt to do what? I would agree with him would be necessary. However, it's only necessary because the problem was ignored too long. Oh, so a little bit of torture is a necessity because the problem was ignored for too long. What is the problem? Can you explain to me in your own words what the major issue is with undocumented migrants? Either way, Asman, okay, I'm asking you. I don't give a shit about Asman's perspective now. I'm asking you, what is the problem with migrants and migrant workers in this country? If you say crime, migrants, documented and undocumented alike, do not commit a fraction of the crimes that natural-born U.S. citizens commit, and per capita as well, for the record. Undocumented migrants are actually responsible for a smaller share of per capita crime than natural-born U.S. citizens are responsible for. They are, by and large, very cognizant of the laws and are simply trying to make ends meet. Their goal for coming into the United States of America isn't to cut the line or anything like that. They're looking for survival. They're taking the jobs and also social welfare. Stop giving him bad talking points, dumbass. For the record, Twiggy, this chatter is f***ing with you. He's giving you two inconsistent positions. Are they actually taking advantage of the welfare state, or are they actually stealing the jobs? If they're stealing the jobs, then they're not stealing unemployment. If they're stealing the unemployment, they're not stealing the jobs. He's purposely baiting you with a bad talking point so you repeat it so that I can dunk on you. Just letting you know. In my opinion, they're easily exploited cheap labor with no rights or protection for corporate greed. On top of that, too many bad individuals come in. Nope. No. This first part of the argument is true, but you and I both know the proper solution for that is documentation. Proper documentation, proper work clearance, proper work authorization. That eliminates this part of this proportion of the conversation. You and I are in agreement on that. This, on the other hand, you and I are not in agreement on. On top of that, too many bad individuals come in. I just gave you hard evidence that is not the case, unless you think they're bad for a different reason. If they had documentation, they wouldn't be illegal. What's the difference between a documented migrant and an undocumented migrant? Well, before you give me the answer, I'll tell you, it's paperwork, it's documentation. If they got the proper authorization and the proper work clearance, which the government has the capability of doing so for virtually every single undocumented migrant that's been on U.S. soil, especially those who have been on U.S. soil for an extended period of time. So you're wrong on that front. And as far as too many bad individuals come in, that's pure speculation. There's no evidence for that. As a matter of fact, there's evidence to suggest that the exact opposite is the case. For this reason, you've come up with a separate You're implying or you're suspecting them of doing something bad. They're willing to ignore the law, which I agree, not always, but definitely will invite bad people. Okay, if they're willing to ignore the law, and for the past, I don't know, however many years, the size of the undocumented migrant population has exploded, right? That's Trump's own statements. Why has crime gone down? Why is crime on a downtrend consistently for years and years and years in the United States of America, especially since the 90s? And that is when the undocumented migrant population actually exploded in size. So why is that the case then? Now, obviously, that's a stupid way to argue, for the record, because I already gave you the direct information necessary, which is that according to clearance, according to jail records, and according to clearance rates, conviction rates, and charges, undocumented migrants are actually responsible for, like I said, a lower share of crime per capita than natural-born U.S. citizens are. Especially when you add on documented migrants as well, the number gets even smaller. So is there, and this is a serious question, okay, and this is one that you don't have to immediately answer, but maybe you can think about on your own. Is there a potential that you might have been lied to? You might have been duped? Do you feel like there is any likelihood that you might have been wrong about this information and the way that it's been presented? I'm not even going to say that, it's your fault. I'm simply asking, do you think that you might have been lied to about undocumented migrants? Because even if they are unwilling to follow the law, which, by the way, I don't think you understand how that process works either, because many of them are actually here on visas, or many of them actually do follow the law as it stands. The law actually purposefully creates this unique legal limbo for undocumented migrants, keeping them undocumented, but also making them attend, court hearings and whatnot. So they are technically on the pathway towards citizenship, or at least proper documentation. They know exactly where these people are, and that's precisely the reason why, their IRS paperwork is what the ICE agents use when they figure out what home they're at, or they know exactly where their job sites are or where they work off of their tax forms, and that's precisely how they go and apprehend them at their place of business. Or they arrest them at court proceedings, at court hearings, because they're following the law. So just because they don't have the full completed documentation doesn't mean that they're not actually following the law. They are following the law. The administration is actually using that as an opportunity to deport them. Even if you didn't know all of that information, which you now know, but even if you didn't know all of this information, even if you had not considered that the only difference between the documented migrant and an undocumented one is simply paperwork and proper clearance, why is it that your automatic assumption, your automatic suspicion, which is not backed by any evidence whatsoever. As a matter of fact, all the evidence readily available shows the exact opposite, has caused you to believe that these are people who are actually doing crimes. I wouldn't know the statistics. Maybe I'm wrong. I go off what I live, and crime isn't my only main concern, but I acknowledge that it's disproportionate risk in the population simply because we don't know who they are or what they've done. I would personally help those here achieve citizenship, but I recognize breaking our laws is still a crime no matter our empathy. Okay, well, first of all, we started off this conversation by justifying torture for people that have been here, that have just been working, that got swept away by Donald Trump. As a matter of fact, we're talking specifically about the Venezuelans that were deported to CICA, 250 of them. And do you know who actually brought the Venezuelans into the country? His name was Donald Trump. Not this time around, but the last time around. As a matter of fact, he offered all the Venezuelans that were coming into the United States of America temporary protected status, i.e. the proper paperwork to not only exist inside of the United States of America, but to be able to work inside of the United States of America. But the problem with temporary protected status is they can be revoked. And when Donald Trump wanted to identify Venezuelans as criminals, as terrorists, as drug dealers and rapists, he decided to revoke the temporary protected status of the Venezuelans that are living on U.S. soil, and decided to actually make an example of Venezuelans that he had actually invited into the country and offered the proper paperwork to. And then he deported them to the torture prison, the torture and rape prison. He did all of this. These are simply innocent people who wanted to survive. I'm not even getting into what the conditions look like in Venezuela and who's responsible for it. We're not even going to get into that part of the story, but that part is also significant. But in the most reductive terms, Donald Trump invited these people into the country, offered them the proper paperwork, actually extended the temporary protected status on his way out in the last administration, only to then turn around and decide Venezuelans are all rapists, monstrous terrorists, even though I welcomed them into the country and gave them the proper clearance to stay here. I'm deciding now to revoke that proper clearance and use them as an example, make an example out of them. 50 plus of the Venezuelans imprisoned in El Salvador actually came in legally and never violated any immigration laws either. We really entertaining the idea that these deportations are about legality? No, of course not. I know the truth. But in order to get someone to arrive at that truth, you have to combat the misinformation. You have to meet them where they're at. And if they're seemingly on the side of like deport them all because they think that there is like illegality happening, or if they think that undocumented migrants are responsible for crime, you just have to make sure that they understand that that is not the case. And if they continue to say, no, I don't believe it, they're still barbaric, they're still violent, and I'm scared of them, then yeah, there will come a point where you can't really reason with someone who is being unreasonable. You can't help someone arrive at a conclusion through logic if they didn't have their prior convictions off of logical, logic and reasoning anyway. Agreed, even if I don't agree with your opinion, just have the conversation, that's what matters. No, this is not an opinion. I have my opinions based off of the facts that I presented, but I don't think you and I agree on the facts. This is the problem. Pizza man, I gave you factually accurate information, and instead of addressing the factually accurate information, you tried to look for different reasons as to why you still think that they're scary. And it's understandable. This is your prior convictions. These are your prior convictions. You watched a lot of Asmongold. You watched a lot of news and information that told you that these guys are scary, that they might be illegal, they might be doing criminal behavior, right? I mean, after all, it's criminal behavior is criminal behavior, right? You know, they engaged in the crossing of a border, or they engaged in visa overstaying, right? That's a criminal act. Except what you probably don't know, as many people don't really know, is that one, not all crimes are the same, and visa overstaying or crossing the border illegally at least one time is actually not as severe of a crime as you would think it is. I mean, I'm not even talking about morally. I'm talking like even in the criminal justice system, this is a civil violation. It's not like a significant, it's not a felony or anything like that. Obviously, it's equivalent to a misdemeanor at most, not a felony. It's also ironic because what we are doing as a process here is a far greater crime than what we have decided these undocumented migrants are doing, but that's the state doing that crime, so it doesn't really matter.
Is you get sent to some torture prison in El Salvador. Maybe then they'll stop showing up. I respectfully disagree with that. Deporting them is fine. There's people who deserve to not be tortured. Well, then they shouldn't have been here. That's the way it is. It's pretty obvious to me that a lot of mainstream media is trying to present, like us sending these illegals and these migrants to El Salvador is like a bad thing. Now, in my opinion, I think it's great. I'm a big fan of it. I think we should do it more. And yeah, maybe Trump might respond or like scare them from doing it or not. But I think it's also very clear that the way that they report on these topics is extremely biased. Like, I think that these news places, I think that they should have their news.
They're biased against torture. Well, it turns out Asmongold actually is in agreement with Barry Weiss. That's Barry Weiss's take. Previously, it covered Asmongold's claim that undocumented immigrants commit more crime and drain public funds is the exact opposite. He calls for violence. His calls for violence don't stop at torture. He calls for immigrant families to be killed. Yeah, but remember, Asmongold is not engaging in violent rhetoric because he's using what the government is doing and justifying it and demanding more of it, and therefore it doesn't read as violent. But if you were to say people have a right to defend themselves against such unjustifiable actions, you would be the violent one. And this is the dynamic that right-wingers actually use all the time. And that's precisely the reason why they can turn around and say, Charlie Kirk wasn't a violent person. He never advocated for violence. He advocated for state violence, and state violence is always permissible. You feel me? And then a lot of dumb self-described centrists will turn around and agree with that. They'll go, hey, these guys are actually not engaging in any sort of violent sentiment or violent rhetoric. They're simply calling it like it is. Check Chatter's logs. I think I saw that he said he was Mexican. Shut the fuck up. Actually, that's the most. Yeah, no, that tracks. I mean, it's a ever shrinking number, but there are still, I suspect, some people of Hispanic background that are super invested in Trump's immigration policies. Maybe even from Texas. Have you seen the decrease in MAGA support rate lately? I feel like I have, but I don't know if I'm stuck in a bubble. No, there is definitely a lot of decrease. There is a noticeable decrease in Trump support for sure. Epstein stuff didn't help. The economy didn't help. Trump's mismanagement is not helping. His incompetence is not helping. The way he carries himself is not helping. But I think ultimately it's just that people, for one reason or another, believed that Donald Trump would fix the prices, right? And he didn't. So at the end of the day, no matter how hard you posture about, white people are back or White people no longer have to apologize for being white, something that they never had to do, something I never had to do at least. No matter how hard people want to believe that like they're winning the culture war, I think for a lot of people, the quiet parts being said out loud is coming across as very repulsive. Because I think at the end of the day, a lot of people want to believe that the people that they've aligned themselves with are actually not as insane. In a weird way, you know how like we were earlier talking about how the right presents the left as in this like cartoonish way, hypersensitive woke scolds that laser in and hyperfixate on minutia that is utterly irrelevant, and it comes across as like repulsive and strange to the average person. I think in some ways the Nick Fuentes contingency on the right is basically doing that as well, because if you ask the average liberal, they'll be like, oh, these Republicans are all fascists, right? Maybe not the average liberal, but the average leftist will say Republicans are all fascists. And for the people in the middle, that doesn't always work, right? They don't always believe that. But the more comfortable Republicans get with nascent fascist ideology, and the more they actually associate themselves with, you know, overt white supremacist sentiment, things of that nature, the more people who are, you know, in the margins find themselves overly repulsed by this kind of politics. It's the same dynamic behind Twitter. A lot of people, if you ask them, myself included, were annoyed with previous Twitter, right? Like I hated it. I always use Twitter as an example between like Democrats running the country versus Republicans running the country. Democrat runs the country. It still sucks, but at least like some of the things are working, right? Twitter under Jack, whatever the fuck, it ran. It was there were a lot of issues. It could have certainly been better, but it still worked, right? It is like the trending tab worked. You know, there was people on there. And then Twitter under Elon, nothing works. Half of the staff is chopped off. They're gone. Everything is running on a skeleton crew. There are a ton of problems. And there's unlimited Nazi sentiment, unlimited porn, unlimited cryptocurrency ads, unlimited misinformation. Everything sucks, right? Bots everywhere, bots galore. And most people realize that that shit sucks. If you ask the average person, even someone who might have thought like, oh, I think Elon might make Twitter better. I don't know. I think Elon is kind of a smart guy. If you ask them now what they think about Twitter, they'll be like, ugh, terrible. I know right-wingers who hate Twitter. Most people in the real world despise Twitter now, like genuinely, because it's a cesspool. Now, I'm a pig, so I will get in that mud and wrestle it out with the rest of the piggies. But most people don't want to because they saw a little bit of that normalization of 4chan poll and they didn't like it, because normal people don't like running around talking about how, you know, every Indian must be killed, or, you know, everything is a direct consequence of organized Jewry and everyone is Jewish and, you know, black people are genetically inferior. People don't like that. People don't want to hear that. Even people who have a lot of attitudes, like lifelong Republicans, and a lot of attitudes that reflect on or resemble exactly the kind of politics I'm talking about, they don't like hearing it. So that's just what it is. Yeah, casual racists, when they meet at competitive races, they go, ugh, you're gross. You're too nerdy with it.